the president do here? He didn't. Go ahead.
George, the president of the United States could have come down here. He could have been involved with the families of these 11 people. He could have commandeered the things that we could have sent the Woods Hole people. We could have sent the Scripps people. That on research vessels in the Gulf of Mexico. He could have demanded a plan in anticipation of this. You know, right? He can't exactly fill the hole up. The last night I was in Larry King with the CEO of the former CEO of Shell. They said they got 85% of the stuff cleaned up in the Gulf from Saudi Arabia. He could be commandeering tankers and making BP bring tankers in and clean this up. They could be deploying people to the coast right now. He could be with the Corps of Engineers and the Coast Guard with these people in Plaquemines Parish doing something about these regulations. These people are crying. They're begging for something down here, and it just looks like he's not involved in this. Man, you got to get down here and take control of this, put somebody in charge of this thing, and get this thing moving. We're about to die down here.
That's ABC News contributor and Democratic strategist James Carville sending a clear message to President Obama and his advisors earlier this week to try to take control of the Gulf oil spill disaster. While the message seemed to be received loud and clear, President Obama finally came face-to-face with the press in the first scheduled news conference in 10 months, attempting to convince Americans he is not standing on the sideline.
My job is to get this fixed. And in case anybody wonders, in any of your reporting, in case you're wondering who's responsible, I take responsibility. It is my job to make sure that everything is done to shut this down. That doesn't mean it's going to be easy. It doesn't mean it's going to happen right away or the way I'd like it to happen. It doesn't mean that we're not going to make mistakes. But there shouldn't be any confusion here. The federal government is fully engaged, and I'm fully engaged.
Jim, the President's Chief of Staff, Rahm Emanuel, is famous for saying, never let a good crisis go to waste. Is it curious to you that in the middle of this Gulf oil crisis, all of a sudden the President decides to hold his first news conference in 10 months?
Well, and he said very explicitly, I'm holding this news conference to let everybody know that I'm holding this news conference. I mean, it was right up there with Bush 41 saying, message I care, 20 years ago. Look, this is, including hauling out the daughter for the little anecdote about, Dad, you're going to get this fixed, aren't you? Which reminded me of Jimmy Carter citing his daughter in the 1980 presidential debate about nuclear war. Didn't work out too well for Carter. We'll see how it works out for Obama.
Yeah, Ellis, you're from the Gulf Coast. You had to be right there with James Carville talking, listening to his impassioned plea to his fellow Democrat president, get us some help down here.
Yeah, and I like the fact, John, that there's finally someone on television who doesn't have an accent. Listen, there's a lot of anger down there. Now, I don't know that quite as much of it is directed at Barack Obama, maybe as Jim would think. What I hear from my friends and relatives down there is an awful lot of anger at BP and some of the other companies. But the administration has clearly failed in a symbolic and a PR way, and those things matter in the political media.
So was the president ill-advised, I guess, to go out there in front of the media, Judy, and say, I'll take responsibility. I'm going to,
No, it was
lay it on my door.
It was very bold. It was a courageous thing to do. Not to say mistakes have been made, but I am wrong. I made mistakes. I'm going to accept responsibility. The problem is that cool, diffident style and the fact that he shows up so far into this crisis. Charles Blow at the New York Times said a very interesting thing. He said, when you see those pictures of that planning group down, the emergency planning group down there on the coast, there's not a single face that people know and recognize as being a political leader. And that's the problem. They appear to have ignored it, even if there is a limited number of things they could have done.
Let's listen to the president in that news conference. Another piece of sound from him. He was responding to a question about whether or not this crisis is tantamount to his own version of Hurricane Katrina. Here's his answer.
Can you respond to all the Katrina comparisons that people are making about this with yourself?
Well, I'll take your second question first. I'll leave it to you guys to make those comparisons and make judgments on it because what I'm spending my time thinking about is how do we solve the problem. And when the problem is solved and people look back and do an assessment of all the various decisions that were made, I think people can make a historical judgment. And I'm
All right. Cal, what do you think about that historical judgment?
Well, look, you don't have to go that far back in history. If the press would go back and re-examine what Senator Barack Obama said about George W. Bush during the Katrina thing, he was all over him in his failure, supposedly, to act more quickly with Katrina. But here's where the bloom is off the rose, John. If you listen to that first clip from the press conference at the introduction of the program today, you'll hear that one reporter who got up and say to the president, "How can you say that? The whole idea that Barack Obama may not be forthcoming is a new revelation to the media. And if this rose begins to wilt, as I see it, the media are going to be all over it."
But it did take a long time. As the Media Research Center pointed out, for the first month, we're like 6 weeks into this thing now, but for the first month, the coverage, 95% of all the coverage on the network news didn't mention the Obama administration. It just treated it as Ellis would like it to, only BP, and not mentioning the failure of the cleanup operation. Right. Now that's changing, but only in the second month of the disaster.
But we still, in the coverage, I think, lack a separation between two things that are very different from each other. The symbolic things that a president and political leaders at all levels need to do at a time of disaster.
That's what Carlo was getting at.
And the actual cleaning up. And I'm afraid in some of the coverage, particularly the conservatively slanted coverage, really has tried to merge those things unfairly together.
Also missing is the technical issues of how you clean this stuff up. All these inventors and scientists who kept coming forward saying, look, we cleaned up something similar to this in another country. Why aren't those people front and center?
Well, we had pictures of the President Friday picking up tar balls on the beach. What more can you ask for?
That was kind of an odd picture. I mean, if you want to show a president who is engaged and involved and really, driving this train, why do you put him in such a sort of a passive activity, picking up tar balls on the beach?
Well, what do you want him to do? Don a wetsuit and jump into the water and start cleaning them? Look, there may not be a lot he can do, but what about the disconnect in the press conference when he was asked about whether or not the head of the minerals agency was fired? He says, well, I don't know about that. This is a guy who's supposedly in charge of this crisis, and he chooses not to tell us whether or not he fired the woman who was supposedly overseeing the oil industry that of course is regulated by the oil industry. This is a very sorry
But you can't have it both ways. You can't complain that he's doing too few symbols and then I don't know PR stunts and then object when he's bending over and picking up a tar ball. Yeah, that's not going to clean up anything, but aren't those the kinds of symbols that you guys have been demanding for the last month?
Well, whether this thing has been adequately covered in the press or not, it does seem to be taking a toll on the president's poll numbers. Americans were asked, how do they think Mr. Obama is doing compared with last month? CBS News shows his poll numbers are slightly down in a poll that they took. 47% approve of the job he's doing, 43% disapprove. Last month, he was at 51% approval, 39% disapproval.